Cedar Creek Medical's 4th-floor ICU smells like antiseptic and floor wax under fluorescent lights that hum at exactly 60 Hz. Danielle Ross moves through the corridor at 0600, her scrubs faded navy blue, her movements economical, nothing wasted, nothing hurried. She adjusts an IV drip for a post-surgical patient in room 408, checks the monitor, logs the vitals. Her hands are steady. The other nurses don't know her story. 6 months at Cedar Creek and she has spoken fewer than 200 words to anyone. They know only that she showed up with impeccable credentials, works double shifts without complaint, and has never missed a single shift in 182 days. In the break room, fluorescent light flickers overhead. Danielle opens locker number 47, and a tarnished challenge coin falls out, hitting linoleum with a metallic ping that echoes against the metal walls. She picks it up quickly. Her thumb traces the worn insignia, an eagle's head, faded but still recognizable. The coin is from 2003. She tucks it back into the bottom of her locker, beneath folded scrubs, and closes the door before anyone sees. What they didn't know was that coin cost 3 Marines their lives. Dr. Marcus Caldwell enters the ICU at 0847, trailing for residents like Remras following a shark. His suit costs $3,200. His watch costs more. He's reviewing charts on his tablet without looking up, which means he's already decided what he thinks before he sees the data. This is how doctors like Caldwell practice medicine, decisions made before the patient is even examined. He passes Danielle in the hallway outside room 412 and his jaw tightens, barely perceptible. She's refilling the medication cart. She doesn't look up. She doesn't acknowledge him. But Caldwell notices the way her hands move, smooth, precise, each motion practiced 10,000 times. Last week she identified a pulmonary embolism in less than 90 seconds while he was still ordering basic labs. That kind of speed doesn't come from nursing school. That kind of speed comes from a place where you get 3 seconds to make the wrong decision and people die. Room 412 contains Admiral Marcus Chen, 74 years old, comatose for 3 weeks. The chart reads unresponsive, likely severe anoxic brain injury, comfort measures only. Caldwell has already billed the VA for consultation visits he never made. $47,000. He's done this 17 times in the past 18 months. The Admiral is supposed to deteriorate. He's supposed to code. He's supposed to die, and Caldwell is supposed to be the last heroic surgeon who tried everything. Instead, the Admiral's vitals are stable. Better than stable. The O2 saturation is holding at 94% on a conservative vent setting. The blood pressure is tracking normally. Something is wrong with Caldwell's perfect plan. He reads Danielle's assessment from yesterday's notes. Fluid balance optimized. Sedation weaned appropriately. Nutrition initiated. Every single line item flagged something in his brain that screamed danger. A nurse doesn't write assessments like this unless she spent time in places where nutrition means life and death happens on a schedule. Unless she's held a bleeding man's hand while the medevac helicopter landed. Unless she's looked at a vitals monitor and known exactly what every number meant before the alarms even sounded. At 11:30, Caldwell enters the physician's cafeteria with his entourage, and that's when it begins. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead. The smell of overcooked vegetables and institutional gravy hangs in the air like a warning. Caldwell sits at his usual table, the one with the view of the parking lot where his Range Rover sits in the spot marked Chief of Surgery. He sees Danielle entering with a tray, salad, coffee, a protein bar. She moves to the far corner. She always sits alone. Caldwell's voice carries across the cafeteria with the casual cruelty of a man who has never faced consequences. "Residents," he says, not looking up from his plate, "I'm taking bets." The new nurse in ICU. He pauses. Calculates. She'll quit within a week. Who's in? Silence from the residents. They know better than to contradict Caldwell on anything. "Come on," he continues. $20 each. Easy money. You watch, she can't handle the pressure. Something about her screams quitter. He finally looks up, scanning the room until his eyes find Danielle at the corner table. She's eating. She doesn't look up. She doesn't react. Her jaw doesn't clench. Her hands don't tremble. She simply continues chewing her salad with the same mechanical precision she uses to adjust for drips. One of the residents, a fourth year named Patterson, ventures quietly, "I don't know, sir." She seems solid. Caldwell's smile hardens. That's what I'm counting on. Solid people always break eventually. The pressure. The hours. The weight of other people's lives. He picks up his fork. $20. Who's in? Two residents push chips across the table. $5 from another. Caldwell nods like he's just made a bet on a horse race, not on a woman's career. But that wasn't the worst part. At 11:47, as Danielle stands to leave the cafeteria, her tray balanced against her hip, Caldwell rises from his table. The entourage watches. The other staff members watch. He walks directly toward her, his trajectory calculated like a surgeon's incision. He's smiling the kind of smile that predators wear when they're testing prey. When he reaches her, he doesn't speak. He simply swings his arm upward in one fluid motion and knocks the tray from her hands. The noise is enormous. The tray hits the floor with a crash that echoes through the entire cafeteria. Salad scatters across linoleum. The coffee cup breaks into ceramic shards that skate across the tile like artillery shrapnel. The protein bar rolls under a table. Every person in the room stops moving. The fluorescent lights hum. The sound of institutional silence, the kind that comes right before something terrible. Danielle's jaw clenches. Once. Barely perceptible. Her hands, which were empty a millisecond before, hang at her sides. Her fingers don't curl. Her breathing doesn't change. When she looks at Caldwell, her eyes are empty, not angry, not hurt, not anything. They're the eyes of someone who learned a long time ago that emotions are a luxury she can't afford. Her face remains stone. "Pick that up, sweetheart," Caldwell says, his voice sweet as cyanide. He's smiling at the residents. He's performing. He's establishing dominance the way a wolf marks territory. "You're making a mess of my floor." Danielle doesn't speak. She kneels. She gathers the scattered pages of the salad, the ceramic pieces, the broken bits of her lunch. Her movements are controlled. Economical. A man next to her, a cardiologist named Torres, starts to help her, but Caldwell's voice stops him cold. "I wouldn't." It's not a request. It's a command. Danielle finishes collecting the debris. She stands. She holds the ruined tray in both hands like it weighs 1,000 pounds. Around her, the residents are laughing, quiet, nervous laughter, the kind that people make when they're testing the waters to see if it's safe. One of them actually points. Caldwell's smile grows wider. "Better luck next time," he says. Then he turns and walks back to his table like he's just completed a surgery. The cafeteria resumes moving. Conversations restart. The moment passes. But it doesn't really pass. It settles. It calcifies. It becomes the kind of thing that doesn't have an ending. Danielle throws away the debris and leaves the cafeteria. She doesn't cry. She doesn't call HR. She doesn't call anyone. She simply clocks back in at 12:04 and returns to the 4th floor, where she spends the afternoon documenting vital signs and adjusting drips and checking on patients who can't speak and don't know her name. That night, at 22:47, Danielle sits on her apartment floor, a studio that costs $1,100 a month and contains almost no furniture, and turns the tarnished challenge coin between her fingers. Back and forth. Back and forth. Her knuckles turn white. The coin shows the emblem of Naval Special Warfare Command. On the reverse side, 3 words are etched: dominate, adapt, survive. Her hands are shaking now, though she's alone. There's no one to watch her. There's no one to judge her. The trembling isn't fear. It's restraint. It's 18 years of holding something down so hard that her hands have learned to betray her only in private. She sets the coin on the floor. She picks up her laptop. She pulls up the Cedar Creek Medical database using the credentials they gave her when she was hired, credentials that are completely legitimate, credentials that check out through every background system the hospital uses. She navigates to room for 12. Admiral Marcus Chen. Admitted 3 weeks ago following a cardiac incident during a VA deposition. No family listed. No visitors recorded. Status, unresponsive. She scrolls through his medical file. She reads his admission notes. She sees the original lab work from the day he arrived. And then she sees the photographs attached to his intake paperwork, a standard headshot for hospital records, nothing remarkable. But her hands stop moving. Her breathing stops. For exactly 5 seconds, her entire body goes still. She knows that face. She would know that face if 50 years had passed and the world had ended and she was the last person alive and somehow that face appeared on a screen in front of her. She knows that face because she held a 9-year-old boy in her arms while debris rained down around them, and she was covered in dust and blood, and he was coughing and crying and asking if she was going to leave him like everyone else had left. The school in Marjah had collapsed on February 17, 2007. 384 children inside. The strike came from an aircraft at 0847. Her unit arrived at 0921, and she was third through the collapse because protocol said the medic goes third. She was fourth out of the rubble with a living child, a boy with dark eyes and a dislocated shoulder and abdominal bruising that suggested internal bleeding. She carried him to a waiting Chinook. She stayed with him during the flight to Kandahar. She watched the medics in the hospital try to save a 9-year-old who had seen something that day that no 9-year-old should see. And then she was ordered to forget he existed. The unit was ordered to forget the entire operation had happened. The whole thing got reclassified so deeply that it stopped existing even in memory. She never found out what happened to the boy. She never asked. Asking would have been against orders. Asking would have meant she was still thinking about the mission. Asking would have meant she hadn't done what she was told to do, disappear. But here he is. 74 years old. An admiral. Lying in a hospital bed for floors below her current station. Lying in a bed in a hospital where a man named Caldwell is counting money he hasn't earned, where a man named Caldwell is betting that she'll break, where a man named Caldwell has no idea that the woman he just knocked a tray out of the hands of knows exactly how to keep a heart beating in a sandstorm. She closes her laptop. She lies down on her mattress. She stares at the ceiling of her studio apartment and she thinks about the challenge coins sitting on her floor, and she thinks about an admiral who should be dead, and she thinks about Dr. Caldwell laughing with his residents, and she thinks about mercy, which is sometimes the hardest thing a person can do. Outside, it starts to rain. The kind of rain that comes to San Diego twice a year. The kind that sounds like applause against the windows. The rain stopped by 12:30. The kind that comes to San Diego twice a year, the kind that sounds like applause against the windows. By the time it dried from the pavement, Cedar Creek Medical's cafeteria had filled with the lunch crowd, residents hunched over phones, attending physicians claiming the tables near the windows, nursing staff rotating through in clusters of 3 and 4, peeling back foil from pre-made sandwiches they wouldn't finish. Dr. Caldwell sat at the center table like a man holding court, his white coat pristine, his stethoscope draped around his neck with the casual authority of someone who'd never questioned his right to wear it. He was telling a story about a patient's family when Danielle pushed through the cafeteria doors with her tray. She wasn't looking for attention. She moved the way she'd learned to move in the mountains of Helmand Province, present but invisible, a body occupying space without demanding it. Caldwell's eyes found her immediately. "Gentlemen, ladies," he announced, his voice cutting across the ambient noise like a blade. The table quieted. Heads turned. "I'll give anyone here $50 if Nurse Ross makes it through the week." 50. Cold. Cash. He leaned back in his chair, that smile spreading across his face, the kind of smile that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with the pleasure of watching someone smaller flinch. She's got that look. The burnout look. I've seen 100 just like her come through these doors. Month, maybe 2, and they're gone. Crying in their cars. Calling their parents. Realizing they can't cut it in real medicine. Laughter rippled through the table like a wave. A resident to Caldwell's left actually slapped the table. A nurse from the 3rd floor smiled into her coffee. Danielle's face remained stone. Not the stone of someone suppressing anger, the stone of someone who'd learned long ago that reactions were currency and she had no intention of paying. Her jaw clenched once, a single muscle spasm at the hinge, so subtle that only someone trained to read tells would have caught it. She didn't pause. Didn't look over. Didn't acknowledge him at all. She simply continued walking toward an empty table in the corner, her footsteps measured and quiet against the tile. Caldwell stood. He moved with the deliberate casualness of a man who'd already decided what he was about to do, the kind of choreography that said his actions were spontaneous only to observers who didn't understand that every gesture was calculated. He positioned himself in her path, and when Danielle was close enough, he did a theatrical stumble, the kind that was just convincing enough to fool people who wanted to believe in accidents. Her tray went airborne. Coffee splashed across 40 square feet of tile in a dark, spreading arc. The sandwich skid under a chair. The plate clattered and spun to rest against the baseboards. The room went dead silent. Forks stopped moving. Conversations died mid-sentence. In that moment, the only sound was the hiss of the ceiling ventilation system working to push air through 200 square feet of suddenly tense space. "Oh, how clumsy of me," Caldwell said, his voice dripping with mock concern. He pulled Admiral Chen's chart from under his arm, the same chart Danielle had studied in the break room at 0600 that morning, the one that documented a decorated naval officer reduced to a single line of assessment, unresponsive, presumed vegetative, and he let it slip from his fingers. Pages scattered across the floor like autumn leaves. "Pick that up, sweetheart." Danielle knelt slowly. Methodically. The kind of kneeling that wasn't submission but simply physics, a body performing a necessary action. She gathered the pages one by one, her movement smooth and practiced, the way someone handles evidence at a crime scene. No trembling. No rush. No tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Just a woman picking up paper. Some of the doctors laughed. Some looked away. A resident in blue scrubs whispered something to the man beside him. The answer came back, "Why doesn't she say something?" And then, quieter, "Because she needs the job." Caldwell crouched beside her. His voice dropped, became intimate in the way that violence often does, low enough that only she could hear, pitched to sound like concern. "You think you're special? You think I don't see you studying those charts like you're hunting for something? Like you're looking for patterns that don't exist?" He paused. The silence stretched. "You're nobody here. A pair of hands. A pulse check and forehang. That's all you are. Stay in your lane, and maybe you'll last the week." Danielle stood, the reassembled chart in her hands. She looked at him once, not with anger, not with hurt, but with the kind of gaze that someone might use to catalogue a specimen, and then she walked away. Her footsteps didn't quicken. Her shoulders didn't bunch. She was the same person who'd walked in, just as quiet, just as invisible. That night in her apartment on the edge of Pacific Beach, Danielle sat on the edge of her bed with the tarnished military challenge coin balanced on her palm. The coin had been with her for 18 years, hammered from aircraft wreckage and shrapnel after a black operation in Kandahar that officially never happened. On one side, barely legible after 2 decades of being turned over and over between calloused fingers, was a call sign, Nomad. The other side showed coordinates and a date and the words Marjah 06. She turned it over. And over. And over again. Not nervously. Methodically. The way a person counts breaths to control a heartbeat. After an hour, her knuckles were white and the skin on her fingertips had begun to ache, but the rhythm never changed. Turn. Pause. Turn. Pause. In her mind, she was already in the Admiral's room at 1400. At 1400 hours exactly, Danielle stepped into room for 12 with fresh vital sheets and a penlight clipped to her scrub pocket. Admiral Chen lay in the ICU bed the way he'd been lying for 3 weeks, perfectly still, oxygen cannula beneath his nose, the ventilator beside him on standby, monitors tracking the steady rhythm of a body that everyone had decided was already gone. Everyone except the eyes that opened fully when she entered. For 30 seconds, she watched them. The pupils were round, equal, reactive. They tracked her movement from the doorway to the left side of the bed. They followed the rise of her hands as she approached the forestand. They shifted when she pulled the penlight from her pocket. This wasn't the gaze of someone absent. This was presence compressed into the only articulation available. She moved to the left side of the bed. His eyes followed. She leaned in, studying the face, and something triggered, a recognition deeper than conscious memory. The bone structure. The scar above his left eyebrow, thin and silver now. The shape of his nose. She'd carried this face out of a collapsed schoolhouse in Marjah 18 years ago. She'd run under mortar fire with a 9-year-old boy in her arms while his weight felt like feathers and his cries felt like the only real thing in the world. She'd handed him to a medevac crew and never learned his name. Never knew if he survived. Never knew anything except the weight of him and the certainty that if she didn't move fast enough, he would become one of the 17 others she couldn't save that week. She glanced toward the doorway. Empty. She pulled the penlight out, but before she used it, before any of the standard assessments, she made a sign. Her hands moved with the fluidity of someone who'd spoken this language long before spoken language itself. Both hands at chest level, index and thumb extended, other fingers curled. The ASL for yes, the question hidden inside, can you see me? His right hand twitched. Not a spasm. An intentional movement. Index finger extended. Then thumb. Slowly. Deliberately. The sign for yes. Her breath caught in her throat. She signed again, can you hear me? Both hands near her ears, fingers wiggling. The ASL for hearing. He looked at her. His right hand moved, weakly, to his neck. His index and middle fingers crossed in an X shape. The sign for no. She signed, can you speak? Her index finger and thumb pinched at her lips, opening like a mouth. She watched his eyes, watched his right hand move. The X again. No. And then, slowly, painstakingly, his fingers began to spell Tortured. Danielle's hand started shaking. Not from fear. From the collision of 18-year-old memory meeting present reality. She signed, do you remember Marjah? Her hands making the shapes she'd been forbidden to make in public, the language they'd told her to forget, the past they'd ordered her to bury. The Admiral's eyes widened. His hand moved, NOLMAD. Her call sign. The name she hadn't heard spoken aloud in 18 years. The name that belonged to a woman who'd officially died in a black site operation in 2006, whose records had been expunged, whose unit had been scattered to the four corners of the military and told never to speak to each other again. Before she could respond, before her hands could make any of the shapes, her heart was suddenly screaming, a voice cut through the room like a blade. Nurse Ross, what exactly are you doing? Caldwell stood in the doorway. His eyes moved from the Admiral to her hands to her face, cataloguing everything, missing nothing. She'd made the calculation in the space between breaths. He didn't understand ASL, didn't know what he'd just witnessed, but he understood that something was happening that shouldn't be. Checking responsiveness, doctor. Her voice came out level, professional, empty. The voice of a woman who'd been trained to disappear into whatever role she was assigned. With sign language. He walked toward her, his movements carrying that same surgical precision that made him so effective at what he did, which was destroying people quietly and getting paid for it. His vegetative. The man's brain is gone. Don't waste time on fantasy diagnostics. You're projecting hope where there's only damage. He pulled her away from the bed with a hand on her elbow, the grip not quite rough enough to be called violent but precisely calibrated to humiliate. "You're reassigned. Room 308 needs a bed bath. Go." Danielle looked back at the Admiral. His eyes were still open. Still tracking. And his hands, barely visible above the blanket, were moving in tiny, desperate shapes. HDLP. She turned and walked toward the door, but she was already calculating. Already counting the minutes until the end of her shift. Already planning how she would slip back here after dark, how she would confirm what the Admiral had signed, how she would learn what happened to the 9-year-old boy she'd pulled from the rubble and why he'd ended up in a Navy uniform and why he'd ended up broken in a room that had already written him off as dead. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the moment she was pulling on her coat in the break room, mentally reviewing the shift reports, when she noticed something in the stack of chart reviews Caldwell had left on the table. Billing records. Hundreds of them. All veteran patients. All with consultation codes that didn't match the services rendered. She pulled 3 at random: Admiral Chen, for phantom surgeries at $8,000 each, a former Marine with a traumatic brain injury; 15 specialty consultations at $6,500 per, a SEAL with PTSD, documentation for procedures he'd never undergone. 18 months of systematic fraud. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it all connected to Dr. Caldwell's signature authorizing payments to accounts that weren't hospital accounts but registered to his wife's maiden name. She photographed everything with her phone. 7 photos. 7 pieces of evidence. 7 reasons why Caldwell's entire surgical practice was about to collapse. By the time she'd finished, Caldwell was already watching the surveillance footage from the break room, his face illuminated by the glow of a monitor in his private office, his phone already in his hand, his mind already moving several moves ahead, already composing the call he would make to the VA Office of Inspector General, already constructing the narrative about a disturbed nurse with falsified credentials, already activating the network of board members and department heads who owed him favors. She had no idea he was already coming for her. At 0200 hours, the monitor in room for 12 didn't whisper. It screamed. The alarm cut through Cedar Creek Medical's night silence like shrapnel through drywall, and Danielle's head snapped up from the charting station before the second beep finished. Her hands moved before her mind caught up, setting down the tablet, pushing back from the desk, moving toward the patient rooms with the fluid precision of someone who'd spent 18 years answering alarms that meant life or death. The hallway tiles were slick beneath her rubber soles. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless mechanical song overhead. She could smell the antiseptic they used to mop the corridors, that sharp chemical bite that never quite masked the undersmell of blood and decay that lived beneath it. Admiral Chen's monitor was throwing arrhythmia when she entered room for 12. The screen was a fever dream of red indicators, O2 sat dropping like a stone, blood pressure plummeting faster than it had any right to. She moved to the bedside and saw it immediately. His neck veins were distended like blue cables straining under impossible weight. His skin had gone the color of old paper. His breathing was shallow, almost gasping, the sound of someone drowning in air. Pericardial tamponade. Blood filling the sac around his heart. Compressing it. Choking it. She pulled the crash cart with one hand and started moving for supplies with the other, her mind already ahead 3 steps, already running through what she needed. 18-gauge needle. Sterile field. Betadine. The Admiral's eyes found her face and held it, and she saw the moment recognition flickered, not of who she was now, but of what she was about to do. She signed as she worked, her hands moving with the same certainty as her feet. "I need to drain your heart. Do you consent?" His left hand lifted from the mattress, trembling. "Why, yes." She prepped the entry point just below his xiphoid process, the skin already cool and clammy beneath the sterile gauze. Her hands were steady as surgical lasers as she positioned the needle. The Admiral's vitals were a countdown timer, 80/50 and falling. 75/48. His breath was coming in whispers now. She had maybe 90 seconds before the pressure in his chest cavity crushed his cardiac output to nothing. She was drawing back on the needle, feeling for the resistance that meant she'd breached the pericardial sac, when the door exploded inward. Dr. Caldwell stood in the doorway in street clothes, polo shirt, casual slacks, a thin gold watch catching the fluorescent light like it was laughing at her. His face was a storm front moving in fast, rage and panic mixing into something uglier than either one alone. He'd been called by the night resident. He'd come straight from wherever he'd been, and his mind had already made the calculation: a crashing Admiral on his watch plus a nurse performing unauthorized procedures equaled exposure. "Step away from that patient." Danielle didn't move. Her voice was flat, authoritative, a lieutenant addressing a confused junior officer. "He has cardiac tamponade. He needs this needle in his chest or he's dead in 3 minutes. Caldwell closed the distance between them in 3 strides and physically pulled her back from the bed. His hand on her arm was hot and slightly damp. He smelled like expensive cologne and fear sweat. "You are a nurse. You do not perform surgical procedures. You are hysterical, and you are removed from patient care effective immediately." He turned to the residents frozen at the monitor station. "Get her out of here. Call psychiatric for evaluation." Danielle took 1 step forward. The Admiral's blood pressure was 70/44. The hiss of the monitor echoed through the room like warning shots. "Doctor, look at his neck veins. His pressure is..." "Security." Caldwell's voice cracked on the word like he was 18 instead of 54. 2 guards arrived within 90 seconds, routine really. Cedar Creek drilled hospital security like the Navy drilled rescue swimmers. They were professional, unapologetic, and absolutely immovable. One of them was a veteran. Danielle could see it in the way he assessed the room, the way his eyes lingered on her face for just a fraction too long, like something in her bearing was setting off buried alarm bells in his nervous system. Caldwell didn't call a code. He didn't run the Admiral's crashing vitals up to the surgical team or grab a pericardiocentesis kit himself, though he'd learned the procedure in medical school like every doctor did. Instead, he pulled out his phone and stepped into the hallway, and Danielle heard him dialing as the guards walked her toward the exit. "Victoria? It's Caldwell. We have a situation." His voice was smooth as silk now, the panic scrubbed away and replaced with the conversational tone of a man solving a problem. "A nurse attempting unauthorized procedures on a patient. Possible credential fraud. Very concerning behavior. I'm having her evaluated psychiatrically, but I need her badge deactivated tonight before she accesses any more patient files." By the time they reached the parking lot, a full 40 minutes later, her locker cleaned out, her badge dead in her hand, the night rain falling like it was angry at the world, Caldwell was already 3 moves ahead of her on a chessboard she didn't know they were playing. He was calling the VA Office of Inspector General now, voice smooth as a clinical presentation, constructing the narrative about a disturbed nurse with falsified military credentials, someone unstable and possibly dangerous, someone who'd been attempting unauthorized procedures in the ED. He was activating his network, a board member who owed him money, 2 department heads whose kids went to private schools he'd helped get them into, Victoria Hernandez who was going to protect him because her Cabo vacation house was still being paid for by phantom VA consultations that never happened. The rain hammered the pavement with a sound like applause for a performance nobody asked for. Danielle stood in the parking lot of Cedar Creek Medical at 0240 in the morning with her badge deactivated and her world burning down around her, and her jaw clenched exactly once. Just once. Her face stayed carved from marble. The guard who'd been watching her, the veteran, saw that jaw clench and something in his expression shifted, some ancient military recognition firing in his brain like he'd just understood something about the woman he was escorting out. She didn't see him thinking it. She was already gone, already walking toward her car, already compartmentalizing the fact that the Admiral's blood pressure was probably flatlined by now, that Caldwell's refusal to call a proper code, his interference, his prioritization of covering his own fraud over a patient's life, all of it was a criminal act, and all of it was going to stay hidden because he had the institutional power to bury it. What she didn't see was the larger trap closing. What she didn't know was that Caldwell was already 2 steps ahead, already constructing the case against her, already making sure that when she tried to report what she'd seen, the fraud, the falsified billing, the Admiral's deteriorating condition, nobody would believe her. She was the unstable nurse with questionable credentials. She was the one having a psychiatric evaluation. She was the one being investigated. She was already being made into a ghost a second time. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was waiting in room for 12, where the Admiral's eyes were closing and his last clear thought before consciousness slipped away wasn't of rescue or survival. It was of the one person who'd ever fought for him before, the one person who'd proven she knew exactly what to do when everything was falling apart, and the knowledge that she'd been pulled away right when he needed her most. The monitor showed flatline at 0247. Within the hour, Victoria Hernandez's voice came through Caldwell's phone like ice through a speaker. The hospital administrator didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Caldwell had financed her vacation home in Coronado with just enough creative billing to bind them together, 3 years of phantom consultations, each one a small noose around her neck. Her secretary made one call to the badge office. Danielle's access codes died at 0247, the exact moment the Admiral's monitor flatlined. The system didn't mourn. Systems never do. Security found her on the 3rd floor, still in her scrubs, still wearing the calluses of 6 months of night shifts. 2 guards flanked her like bookends. She didn't resist. She didn't speak. Her jaw clenched once, barely perceptible, but her face remained carved from marble as they walked her down the east corridor, past the break room where she'd spent countless nights staring at cold coffee, past the supply closet where she'd steadied her breathing after her first week, when everything she'd buried threatened to surface. The badge at her chest caught the fluorescent light one last time before they stripped it away. She didn't watch it go. The locker was hers for exactly 4 minutes. They stood beside her while she gathered the essentials, a spare shirt, her phone charger, the tarnished military challenge coin she kept in the deepest corner, the one she'd turned over and over in her fingers for 18 years while remembering faces of people who no longer had names. Her hands moved with mechanical precision. No trembling. No hesitation. She didn't need much. When you've spent 2 decades owning nothing, you learn to travel light. The parking lot was empty except for rain that had begun falling sometime after midnight, the kind of San Diego rain that felt like an accident, cold and relentless against asphalt that had forgotten what water tasted like. Her truck, a 2007 Tacoma with one working taillight, sat under a sodium lamp like a moth pinned to something immense. The guards walked her to it. One of them said something about severance paperwork. She didn't hear. The roar in her ears had become familiar. It was the same sound that had lived inside her head for 18 years, the sound of a Black Hawk's rotors fading, leaving her behind in a desert that had rules she no longer recognized. But that wasn't the worst part. Caldwell had already called the VA Office of Inspector General by the time she turned the ignition. A voice on a recording at 0256 hours, speaking carefully, with just the right tremor of concern. A disturbed nurse. Forged credentials. Psychiatric history he was deeply worried about. He had no psychiatric history for her, because she didn't exist, but the lie was so smooth it felt like truth. 3 board members received emails before dawn. 2 department heads got phone calls before their first cup of coffee. The network was simple, efficient, built on 18 months of careful cultivation. Each of them had received something from Caldwell, a contract awarded, a daughter's tuition, a mortgage interest rate that shouldn't have been possible. The ecosystem of favor and obligation. A single tap and it shuddered into motion. They would bury her before she noticed the patterns. Before her hands could reach into the files and pull out the phantom consultations, the inflated codes, the systematic theft from veterans who had already given everything. Caldwell had learned long ago that the best defense isn't a gun. It's credibility. It's a whisper in the right ear. It's making sure that when someone tried to warn people about you, no one believed them because you'd already told them she was unraveling. The diner was called Marina's. It sat on the edge of San Diego like a ship run aground, neon sign flickering, the kind of place where the clientele asked no questions and the coffee came in heavy ceramic cups that held heat like a secret. At 0300 hours, Danielle was the only customer. She sat in a booth by the window, her scrub still damp with rain, her hands wrapped around a cup that had gone cold exactly the way everything else in her life had learned to do. The waitress had stopped checking on her around 0230. The smart ones learned to read silence. Her reflection stared back from the black window like a ghost looking for the living. Not Danielle. Not the nurse with the steady hands and the quiet voice and the way she moved through Cedar Creek like she belonged nowhere in particular. The reflection showed something else entirely. Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross, the woman whose service record had been sealed in 2006 and archived in a building that didn't appear on any map. 23 years old then. 41 now. The math didn't add up because her life had stopped adding up the day they told her she was dead. She'd been assigned to Joint Special Operations Command's Direct Action Team, Task Force 121. Kandahar Province. A black operation in 2006, the kind where the rules changed every time the mission briefing room door closed. They'd been after a network chief in the My-1 district, high-value target, 6 weeks of prep, satellite imagery, and signal intercepts and the usual machinery of organized killing. Her unit was 11 operators. Delta Squadron, attached to 160th SAW for insertion and extract. The operation had been classified. It still was. What happened in that schoolhouse in Kandahar had erased 13 names from every official record. Her name was one of them. The Navy had done it cleanly, bureaucratic erasure, a pink slip signed at midnight in an office where fluorescent lights never stopped humming. Naval intelligence had told her the same thing they told the other survivors: the operation had to remain buried. The people they'd gone in for had connections that reached into places where classified meant invisible. The only way to keep the secret safe was to let everyone think the mission had killed them all. Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross had died in that schoolhouse. The woman who walked out, who dragged a 9-year-old boy named Marcus Chen from a collapsed building and carried him 7 kilometers to the extraction point, that woman had no name, no rank, no record of ever existing at all. She'd been ordered to disappear. Not hide. Disappear. No access to her military records. No connection to her family. They'd been told she was killed in action, and that story was the only version of her they were allowed to keep. No pension that could be traced. No contact with anyone from the unit. Complete severance from the woman she'd been, so complete that 18 years later she could sit in a diner in San Diego and not recognize herself in the window. The only proof that Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross had ever existed was the challenge coin in her hand. Tarnished silver, shrapnel embedded in the back from an IED that had killed 2 men who stood closer to the blast than she did. The front showed the Task Force 121 insignia, a lightning bolt and a skull, though officially that unit didn't exist. She'd been turning it over and over for 18 years. Once in the dark. Once in the light. Muscle memory that had become ritual. Prayer to a god that had already forgotten her name. The coffee was cold. The diner was closing. Marina, a woman who'd been running this place since 1993 and had seen every kind of broken person who needed a place to sit, didn't charge her. She left a $5 bill anyway. You don't take charity in a place like that. You pay your way and you leave your ghosts behind where they belong. At 0500 hours, Danielle entered Cedar Creek Medical through the loading dock, moving through corridors in the basement that she'd memorized during 6 months of night shifts. The way light moved through the tunnels. The sound of ventilation shafts at 0300 hours, when everything quieter. The route from the service entrance to the surgical wing that bypassed every security checkpoint. She'd always been good at maps. Always been good at knowing where the exits were. Room for 12 was dark except for the faint glow of the cardiac monitor. The Admiral lay motionless, his pressure dropping in real time, 70/40 and falling. Heart rate erratic. The night nurse had been called to an emergency on the 4th floor. The room was hers alone. She closed the door. Locked it. Moved to his bedside with the kind of silence that comes from someone who learned to walk without making sound. She raised her hands. Her fingers formed the question slowly, deliberately, "Do you trust me?" His eyes had been unfocused, drifting. they snapped to clarity. His fingers moved with effort, trembling slightly, but the message came through unmistakable. Yes. Nomad. I remember you. She prepped the pericardiocentesis with hands that knew this procedure like language. The equipment was exactly where protocol said it should be. Chlorhexidine to mark the insertion site. 14-gauge needle. The angle calculated not from textbook but from memory. Sandstorms in Marjah, under sniper fire from the Jolan district, in the darkness of a forward aid station where there were no monitors and only her hand separating living from dead. She inserted the needle at a 45-degree angle beneath his xiphoid process. Advanced slowly. Felt the sudden give as the needle pierced the pericardium. Dark blood filled the syringe. She withdrew 60 cubic centimeters. Pressure climbed. 75/50. 80/55. 95/65. His color returned like someone waking from a long sleep. His eyes cleared. His breathing deepened. The flat line that had lived on the monitor transformed back into rhythm. Sinus rhythm. Beautiful, perfect, alive. A knock on the door. Loud. Official. Security. Open up. She unlocked it and stepped back. Dr. Caldwell pushed through with 2 guards and a nurse supervisor, his face already constructed into whatever expression he'd prepared for this moment. Then he saw it. The syringe. The blood. The Admiral's vitals climbing back toward life. His face shifted through 3 expressions in rapid succession: confusion, understanding, then something colder. A man realizing that the story he'd written was being edited by someone else. You just ended your career, he hissed. But the Admiral's hands were already moving. His fingers formed letters with deliberate precision, each one a word, each word a hammer against everything Caldwell had built. CALLSIGNNOMAD. She saved my life 20 years ago in Marjah. She just saved my life again. The gathering crowd in the doorway went absolutely still. A resident. 2 nurses. An orderly. The night supervisor. A security guard whose nameplate said Clayton, a man whose face showed the particular weariness of someone who'd spent time in places where the rules broke down regularly. Clayton stepped forward. His eyes locked on Danielle's face with the sudden certainty of someone who'd just recognized a ghost. Nomad? His voice came out small. Then again, louder, shifting into the precision of someone reading a roster he'd memorized years ago. Master Chief Petty Officer. United States Navy. The room held its breath. In the lobby, someone had turned on the television. Network. 05 for 5 hours. A special program, Lost Heroes of Marjah. The screen filled with Danielle's photograph, younger, in dress blues, official service portrait above words that made 3 people in the hallway gasp aloud. Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross, missing presumed dead. A veteran visiting his father in room for 10 heard the commotion. Saw the screen. Saw Danielle standing in the hallway. Shouted loud enough to wake 3 floors, "That's her. That's the Master Chief." The hallway transformed. People poured out of rooms, drawn by something they couldn't name but recognized immediately. A security guard stood at attention and saluted, the kind of salute you only give the people you've trained to trust with your life. A visiting VA administrator, in Cedar Creek for a routine fraud audit, pulled his tablet with shaking hands, accessed the classified personnel files he should never have been able to access, and his face drained of color as he read aloud, his voice fracturing on every word. Navy Cross. Silver Star. Purple Heart with 2 clusters. 27 confirmed combat saves. Call sign Nomad. The Admiral's hands continued signing. A nurse who knew ASL translated for the crowd, her voice steady but thick, "She died saving my life once." Long pause. Then spent 20 years dead so the mission stayed buried. Another pause. "And she just saved my life again." The hallway went dead silent. 10 full seconds. No one moved. No one breathed. The silence was so complete you could hear the ventilator in the Admiral's room, that steady mechanical rhythm that had become the soundtrack to survival. Then Clayton began clapping. Slow. Deliberate. A Marine's respect for someone who'd earned it in sand and blood and impossible choices. A nurse joined. Then a resident. Then everyone, the applause building like thunder approaching from very far away, coming closer, becoming impossible to ignore. Dr. Caldwell tried to back away. But two men in dark suits were already stepping off the elevator, FBI credentials visible, moving straight toward him with the kind of purpose that meant the story had already changed. She broke the glass door of the loading dock with her palm facing inward, catching the falling pieces before they scattered, moving through the basement corridors of Cedar Creek Medical like a ghost returning to haunt the place that had tried to erase her. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that sterile white that made wounds look worse and hope look scarce. Her scrubs were different now, borrowed from a friend who still worked nights, but the muscle memory was the same. Basement to third floor. Service elevator. No cameras in the stairwell. She'd memorized this building the way soldiers memorize terrain. She always memorized terrain. The Admiral's room was exactly as she'd left it 6 hours ago, machines breathing for him, monitors tracing the small electrical storms of a man trapped between life and the mercy of flatline. His monitor started climbing. Heart rate 162. Then 181. The rhythm fragmenting. She recognized it instantly. Pericardial tamponade again. The blood was crushing his heart in its own sac, a slow suffocation that would look like nothing on the monitors to anyone who wasn't paying attention. But Danielle was always paying attention. She moved to his bedside without hesitation, without asking permission she didn't have. Her hands rose into the space between them, and she began to sign. Slow. Deliberate. Asterisk permission to intervene. Asterisk her fingers formed each word like a question spoken in the only language that might reach him through whatever wall his captors had built inside his nervous system. Asterisk I need your consent. Asterisk the Navy Cross citation would later note her precision under pressure. The psychiatric evaluation Caldwell had ordered would note her sudden behavioral escalation. She would remember only this, the chance to save someone twice. His eye snapped into focus. The monitors spiked awareness, recognition, something like terror sliding through his pupils before crystallizing into absolute clarity. His hands moved weakly, fingers trembling but purposeful. Asterisk yes. Nomad. I remember you. Asterisk for words. A lifetime compressed into hand shapes and finger angles. She had pulled him from rubble when he was 9. His name had been unimportant then. Only the fact that he was breathing mattered. Now his breathing was failing and he knew exactly who she was, and there was no time to think about any of that because his O2 sat was dropping. 68, 64, 61. She found the needle in her pocket. She always carried supplies now, the way some people carry cigarettes, and she positioned it at the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, the exact point where the pericardium sat like a drum stretched too tight. Her hands moved with the terrible, fluid precision of someone who had done this in a sandstorm, who had done this with a screaming 9-year-old bleeding out beside her, who had done this when the alternative was watching another child die in a place nobody was supposed to be dying. The needle went in. The hiss of air escaping. The immediate drop in pressure. The Admiral's monitors tilting back from the cliff. The gathering started small. A resident pushing a medication cart heard the change in tone. A night shift nurse doing rounds in the adjacent room felt the shift in air pressure the way animals feel earthquakes. Within 90 seconds there were 6 people in the room, then 8, then a Marine guard named Clayton who'd done 2 tours in Fallujah and recognized the signature moves of someone who'd been trained by people whose names never appeared in official records. He watched her hands. He watched the Admiral's hands. He watched the slow, deliberate gestures that spelled something out to the growing crowd, a story told in the language of sign, which meant a story the Admiral had been holding inside his body for 18 years while the world assumed he was vegetables in a hospital gown. The Admiral's fingers moved across the space between them, and everyone in the room felt the weight of it even if they didn't understand. Asterisk she pulled me from rubble when I was 9 years old in Marjah. Asterisk his hands shaped the words. Asterisk I was captured. They broke my voice. They broke my hearing. For 18 years I could not speak. Could not listen. Asterisk a pause. His eyes locked on hers. Asterisk this morning she asked permission before she saved my life. No one has ever asked me permission for anything again. Asterisk. That was when the television in the lobby played the story that would change everything. Danielle didn't see it happen. She was still in the room, still holding the needle she'd just used, still standing in the exact spot where she'd performed a procedure that should have required authorization and oversight and probably a lawyer. But someone had left the hallway monitor on, the one that played Dodd specials during the overnight hours, and the photograph filled the screen at the exact moment the network was running a piece called Lost Heroes of Marjah, the soldiers we left behind. The image was 18 years old. Danielle Ross, face leaner then, eyes harder then, standing in desert camouflage with a 7.62 rifle slung across her chest and dust on her boots that looked like it was ground from broken buildings. Below the photograph, in white block letters, Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross, missing presumed dead, 2006. The hallway went the way quiet goes when someone turns off a loud machine. Not peaceful quiet. Shocked quiet. The kind of silence that has weight. Clayton stepped forward. The Marine, the one with Fallujah in his service record, walked into the Admiral's room like he'd been summoned. He looked at Danielle, really looked at her, not at the nurse he'd assumed she was, but at the shape of her hands, the architecture of her shoulders, the way she stood as if ready to breach a door or catch falling glass, and he understood. His voice came out in parade ground tone, the kind of voice that doesn't ask questions because it already has the answers. Master Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy. Not a greeting. A salute performed with words. The VA administrator was already pulling files. His fingers flew through the classified folders that had been sealed in his office safe, the ones marked with red stamps that meant serious consequences for anyone who read them without authorization. He found her citation and his face drained of color the way faces drain when they realize they've been standing next to a ghost and treating it like a person. His voice came out rough, broken at the edges. Navy Cross. Silver Star. 2 Purple Hearts. He stopped reading. He couldn't read the next part aloud because his throat had closed. She's been decorated 4 times. We reported her missing in 2006. The file says she died in an operation that we still can't discuss. She's been dead for 18 years. The Admiral's hands moved again, slowly this time, forming each gesture with the precision of someone who'd been waiting 18 years to tell this story and wouldn't waste a single word. Everyone in the hallway could follow it now. Even the residents who didn't know sign language understood the shape of what his fingers were spelling. Asterisk she died saving my life once. 18 years ago in Marjah. Then she spent 20 years dead so the mission stayed buried. And she just saved my life again. She has never asked me for anything. I will spend the rest of my life asking what I can give her in return. Asterisk. The silence lasted exactly 10 counted seconds. Someone's monitor beeped. And 4 pump hissed. The fluorescent lights continued their electric hum like they didn't realize the world had just reorganized around a truth that had been hidden in plain sight. Then Clayton started clapping. 1 hand. Then both hands. Then a resident. Then the nurse. Then everyone in the hallway and the adjacent rooms and the people who'd rushed in from the nurse's station. The applause built like an engine igniting. One Marine veteran looked at another and they both stood at parade rest, and then at ease, and then full salute, the kind of salute you only give to people who've already paid the price that makes the rest of your service make sense. And that was when the FBI moved. 2 men in dark suits had been waiting for the exact moment when the cascade would begin. They'd been investigating Caldwell for 9 months. The warrant had been signed at 4:16 a.m. By the time the applause reached its crescendo in the hallway, they were already in his office, seizing billing records that showed phantom consultations dating back 18 months, inflated procedure codes that Caldwell had billed to veteran patients who would never know they'd been fraudulently charged, kickback arrangements routed through Victoria Hernandez's shell companies and offshore accounts. The money trail was sloppy. Caldwell had gotten sloppy the way all predators get sloppy when they think they've already won. The first agent placed the folders in an evidence bag. The second agent found the phone records. He called the Office of Inspector General at 2:33 a.m., the agent said. Tried to preemptively discredit her. Claimed she was forging credentials. Claimed she was mentally unstable. The OIG flagged it immediately because her real file is classified and any access attempt triggers counterintelligence alerts. That's what triggered us to execute the warrant. He tried to bury her by accessing a system that doesn't exist, and in doing that, he buried himself. They found him 3 floors below where Danielle was standing. Dr. Caldwell was in his office, still in his white coat at 6:17 a.m., because he always arrived before the sun. The agents walked in without knocking. Dr. Marcus Caldwell, you're under arrest for wire fraud, healthcare fraud, and falsifying federal documents related to veteran patient care. His face went from red to gray. The color drained like someone had pulled a plug. This is absurd. I'm chief of surgery. Do you know who I? We know exactly who you are, the second agent said. We've been investigating you for 9 months. You can either cooperate now or make this harder. Your choice. They cuffed him in his office. Caldwell locked eyes with the agent for just a moment, searching for something. Sympathy. A way out. Any crack in the machinery that had caught him. He locked eyes with nothing but the cold competence of federal prosecution. The perp walk happened through the main lobby at 6:34 a.m. Word had spread through the hospital like electricity through water. Nurses clustered in doorways. Residents stopped mid-conversation. The security guard, Clayton, the Marine, positioned himself in the corridor where Caldwell would have to pass, and he stood at attention. Not aggressive. Just present. The kind of presence that says asterisk I see you, and I know exactly what you are, and I'm not impressed. Asterisk. The television was still playing the Dodd special. Danielle's photograph filled the screen as Caldwell walked past it, his hands cuffed, his face the color of old concrete. One of the nurses whispered something to another. A veteran who'd been waiting in the ER looked at the photograph, then at Caldwell, then back at the photograph. That's Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross, he said quietly. She was on the memorial wall for 18 years. I helped build that memorial. She was in it. Caldwell was walked through the front doors into the early morning light of San Diego. News cameras had already picked up the story. Someone had called them the moment the FBI arrived. The perp walk would be on the evening news, then the morning shows, then the networks would start digging into his background and finding more. Victoria Hernandez was arrested at her home 3 hours later. The hospital board held an emergency meeting at noon, and by 1:41 p.m., 3 members had resigned rather than face the investigations that were already starting. The VA administrator found Danielle in the hallway outside the Admiral's room. He stood there for a moment, gathering words that would never be adequate. Master Chief, I don't know what to say. We thought you were dead, she said quietly. Her voice had changed. Lower now. Less deferential. The voice of someone who'd stopped pretending. I was. For 18 years. He nodded slowly. He had no response to that. The Admiral wants to see you. When you're ready. Just you. He says there's something he's been waiting 18 years to ask. Danielle looked down at her hands. They were still steady. They were always steady. But in the palm of her right hand, she held something she'd taken from her locker before security had walked her to the parking lot. A tarnished military challenge coin, worn smooth by 18 years of fingers worrying its edges during moments of doubt. She turned it over slowly. The Navy insignia caught the hallway light. On the back, engraved in small letters, were 3 words, asterisk they will remember. Asterisk. She walked into the Admiral's room and closed the door. The monitors continued their steady rhythm. Outside in the hallway, Clayton the Marine was already on his phone, calling other veterans he knew, telling them the story that had just rebuilt itself in Cedar Creek Medical. The word would spread through the veteran community like a signal through static. Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross. Not dead. Not missing. Just waiting. Just quiet. Just saving lives in the dark until the moment she couldn't hide anymore. If you want to see what happens when people finally discover who's been standing next to them all along, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. What would you do if you'd spent 18 years dead and nobody noticed? Tell us in the comments below. Because the ones who've seen the worst are often the ones who give the most.